When my wife Maria and I first bought 657 Boulevard, we thought we had found our dream home. It was perfect. An old but beautiful colonial-style house in a quiet, upper-class neighborhood in Westfield, New Jersey. The kind of house you'd expect to see in a magazine, with tall windows, a sprawling yard, and a history dating back over a century. It was expensive, sure, but we had saved up for this. It felt right, a fresh start for our family. Our three kids loved it too. They spent the first afternoon racing through the halls, choosing their bedrooms, dreaming about the life we'd build here. We had no idea that someone was already watching us, that our arrival had set something in motion, something we couldn't stop. The first letter arrived 3 days later. I remember that day clearly. I had just gotten home from work, covered in paint and dust from the renovations, when I saw an unmarked envelope sitting in the mailbox. No return address, no postage stamp, just our new address written in thick black ink. I opened it, expecting a welcome letter from a neighbor. But the moment I read the first line, my stomach dropped. Dearest new neighbor at 657 Boulevard, allow me to welcome you to the neighborhood. 657 Boulevard has been the subject of my family for decades, and as it approaches its 110th birthday, I have been put in charge of watching and waiting. Watching. Waiting? I kept reading, my fingers tightening around the paper. My grandfather watched the house in the 1920s. My father watched in the 1960s. Now it is my turn. Do you know the history of the house? Do you know what lies within its walls? I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Then, I see that you've already started moving in. Contractors, I assume? Tisk, tisk, tisk. You do not want to make 657 Boulevard unhappy. My hands started to tremble. Someone had been watching us. And then, the part that made my blood run cold. You have children. I have seen them, so young, so full of life. Do you need to fill the house with the young blood I requested? Once I know their names, I will call to them and draw them to me. I dropped the letter. My heart was pounding. They had seen my kids. That night, I couldn't sleep. I double-checked every lock, every window, every shadow in the house. At 3:14 a.m., I heard something. A soft knock. Not at the door, at the window. I crept downstairs, barely breathing. Outside, under the dim glow of the porch light, no one was there, but when I looked closer, my stomach twisted into knots. There were footprints, not leading to the house, leading away, as if someone had stood there, watching, and then disappeared into the night. I took the letter to the Westfield Police Department. The officer read it, his face darkening. "This isn't just a prank," he muttered. "This person knows too much." But there was nothing they could do. No fingerprints, no return address, no way to track them. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bitter ex-owner, someone playing a twisted joke. Then, another letter arrived. This time, it was worse. 657 Boulevard is alive. It has been waiting for you. I have been waiting for you. You are changing the house too much. You are disturbing it. I felt sick. The renovations, the new paint. Had we upset something? At the bottom of the letter, in red ink, have they found what's in the basement yet? I never wanted to go into that basement. It was cold, damp, and too quiet. But now, I had to know. I grabbed a flashlight and crept down the stairs, the wooden steps groaning under my weight. The basement was mostly empty, except for one thing, a single wooden chair, facing the wall, like someone had been sitting there, watching. Then I noticed something, a tiny door built into the far wall. It wasn't on the house plans. I stepped closer, heart hammering, and reached out. Knock, a loud single knock from the other side. I ran. That was it. Maria and I packed our bags, took the kids to her parents' house. We didn't come back for a week. But when we did, something felt wrong. The house was too quiet. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The security cameras had been disconnected, every single one. Someone had been inside. We never moved in. We put the house back on the market, but the letters kept coming, even after we left. Even after another family moved in. 657 Boulevard had a new family now, and whoever the watcher is, they're still out there. Waiting, watching, for the next family, for the next young blood. It was a quiet, ordinary life. I had retired from the railroad years ago, and though I lived alone in a modest home in Denver, Colorado, it was enough. My wife, Helen, had recently broken her hip and was hospitalized, so I spent my days in my routine, visiting her at the hospital, reading the newspaper, playing my mandolin, and trying to keep busy. Our children had long since moved out, and the house, though full of memories, was now eerily empty. But something started to feel off. At first it was nothing, just small things. A creak upstairs when I knew I was alone. A fleeting shadow in the corner of my eye that would vanish when I turned to look. That nagging feeling, the one that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The sense that someone was watching me, even when I was sure I was alone. Then it got worse. Food started disappearing. At first, it was just a slice of bread here, a bit of milk gone there. Nothing I couldn't explain away. Maybe I had forgotten I used it. I was getting older after all. But the missing food became more frequent. The pantry felt emptier each time I checked, even though I knew I hadn't used as much. I started to wonder if I was losing my mind, and then there was the breathing. At night, as I lay in bed, I'd hear it. The soft, faint sound of breathing. It wasn't outside, and it wasn't from the hospital. It was inside the house, from the walls. I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was the house settling, or the wind moving through the cracks in the old wood. But every night it was the same, a breath. The unmistakable sound of someone, or something, living inside the walls. The night of October 17th, 1941, I was expected for dinner at a neighbor's house. I was a man of habit, and everyone knew it. When I didn't show up, they grew worried. They walked over to check on me. The door was unlocked. The house was still. The curtains were drawn. When they stepped inside, it was eerily silent. And then they found me. I don't know how long I'd been lying there. My skull caved in, beaten with the cast-iron stove shaker. Blood splattered across the walls, pooling beneath me, staining the carpet. The stench of copper and death filled the room. There were no signs of forced entry. The doors were locked, the windows untouched. Whoever had done this had never left. Months passed, but there were no answers. The police couldn't explain it. No one had seen anything suspicious, and the house, locked up tight, offered no clues. The case went cold, and the house remained like a tomb. In July 1942, a new family moved in. They thought it was just an old house, nothing special, but soon the noises started. The shuffling of feet when no one was walking, the creaking of doors opening when no one was near them, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. And then things started moving, objects shifted, food disappeared from the fridge. One night, the wife swore she heard someone breathing behind her in the kitchen. When she turned, no one was there. Terrified, she called the police. They arrived, skeptical at first, but then something caught the attention of one officer, Fred Zarnow. He noticed a small, nearly invisible door hidden behind a shelf in a closet. Too small for a grown man, but just big enough for someone desperate enough to fit through. Officer Zarnow pried it open, and that's when they found him. A man, gaunt, starved, his skin stretched tight over his bones, matted hair, wide eyes filled with terror and madness. He had been living inside the walls, hiding, for almost a year. The man's name was Theodore Coneys. I had known him years ago before I retired. He was a drifter, homeless, cold, starving. One night, while I was visiting Helen in the hospital, he crept into my house. He found the tiny crawl space in the attic, a place so small it barely fit him. But to him, it was a sanctuary. At night, he would slither down from the attic like a spider, moving through the house in the shadows. He ate my food, crept through the rooms, hiding in plain sight. Until one night I came home earlier than expected. I saw him. He panicked. He grabbed the nearest object, the stove shaker, and struck me in a fit of terror. My skull was crushed, my life stolen away in an instant. He crawled back into the walls, where he stayed. For months, while the house sat empty, he lived in the crawl space, descending at night to roam the halls unnoticed. Even when the new family moved in, he stayed. Watching. Waiting. And when they called the police, he remained hidden. They never found him. Not until Officer Zarnow discovered his tiny sanctuary behind the shelf. Theodore Coneys was arrested. But the house, My house was never the same. The new owners, even after the horror had passed, could never shake the feeling of being watched. Sometimes, when they lay awake at night, they swore they could still hear it. The shuffle of feet in the attic, the whisper